Well, first things first, take a deep breath. You've worked very hard to prepare for today, for this moment. So relax. I know you're in good company. I'm going to read through some introductory comments momentarily, but first we'd like to have the judges and team members just introduce yourself. Do not identify the university you're with, nor will we. We'll be agnostic here. We are identifying where we're from, where we may have flown in from. So we're all just on neutral playing field in the judging capacity as well as you're presenting to us. So first names only.
Hi, I'm Audrey.
Okay.
And I'm Emma. And my name is Jalen.
Hi, Jalen. I'm Jason. I'm a Chief Strategy Officer at a marketing consulting firm, Analysis Group. And I'm also a doctoral student, so you're in good company. I'm a student as well, so no pressure here. And my fellow senior judge is Gail. Ever introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm a retired executive vice president of PNC Bank, where I financed mostly acquisitions, and have a career in that as well as international. And what else can I say?
Oh, to be retired. I mean, someday you're
Yes,
you're at one end.
I don't think since I retired I've gotten up at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Well, I am Amber. I'm a VP of Tax of Westful Industrial. We're a public traded company. I assume we can talk about
Where you work? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. We're publicly traded real estate, industrial industry, mostly warehouses, development, acquisition, rental. Yeah.
And I'm Michael Ambrozovic. I'm the Vice President of Internal Communications for the Albertsons Companies. We're the United States' second largest grocery retailer with 300,000 people in 34 states.
Awesome. That's great. Very nice to meet you all.
Yes.
Well, now I'm going to read a brief statement to you. In this part of the competition, you're going to be taking on a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to us, the judges. So please make sure that everyone knows who you are and who we are before you begin your presentation. You have about 25 minutes to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that really pastors musters on all three accounts there. I'll be timing it 25 minutes. I'll give you a 5-minute warning, that you can see here. And during this time, you'll be uninterrupted. Following that 25 minutes, we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes for the judges in our role to ask you questions. And then after that, we'll take off our identities and we'll have a 10-minute session for Q&A. Sound good?
Thank you so much.
All right. So kick it off to you.
Thank you. Hello, Kern Water Bank Authority. My name is Audrey Burley, and these are my colleagues, Jalen Walton and Emma Simonis. Now, we are here today to advise you on the future of California water, including its ownership, distribution, and use. Now, as California residents, you are no strangers to the mega drought that has gripped the western United States for the past 2 decades. And although the past year has alleviated some of these concerns, experts have still warned that the challenges of water access are far from over. And so California needs to take drastic steps to adapt to the rising intensity of these droughts. And we believe that the Kern Water Bank Authority could be an instrumental to making positive changes for your communities when facing this issue. Now, one thing that we would like to note today is that water scarcity is a crisis that affects the world. And it's estimated that right now, water scarcity impacts 40% of the world's population. And so this is a global problem. But today, we're here to tackle it just within your community because we believe that solving the water crisis can be done one community at a time, starting with yours. And as a water bank that is dealing with 488 billion gallons of water, you are instrumental to helping alleviate this crisis and are instrumental in this narrative. Now, one thing that we would like to note is the stakeholders that rely on you. Now, these stakeholders will be addressed throughout our presentation. We will touch on all of them, but we wanted to bring them up forth to have them in the front of your mind as we're going through this presentation. First, our water districts, farm workers, California citizens, immigrant families, the environment, and future generations. Now, let's do a review of what we're going to be talking about with you today. First, we have our issue overview, where we will be going over your history and the water crisis in California. Then we will talk about our race initiative. This initiative is a framework that we will be using to help you make a water secure future for your stakeholders. It includes reevaluate, adopt, collaborate, and empathize. And it's important to note that throughout this race initiative, We will also be making connections to the Sustainable Development Goals. Then lastly, we will give our final recommendations for you. Now, one thing that we would like you to be aware of throughout this presentation is that the Kern Water Bank Authority, what it is truly capable of, because we want you to be a positive actor. And in fact, we are very happy to be here today because you called us in because you want to make those changes. So we are here to engage you, not in wonderful, wasteful, or even wishful thinking. We are here to engage you in worthwhile thinking. Because we know that through our race initiative, we can help you align your goals with the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN to create a plan that benefits both the bank itself and the future of California water as a whole. Now I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Emma, who's going to give you an issue overview to set the background for our recommendations that we give throughout our race framework.
Thank you, Audrey, for that introduction. Let's review your history as the Kern Water Bank Authority. In 1988, the Department of Water Resources, also known as the DWR, with contractors from the State Water Project, attempted to develop the Kern fan element. But after experiencing legal, environmental, and institutional issues, they decided that the project was just not feasible. So in 1994, after a terrible drought, large contractors, oh, I thought it was the two parts.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes. Large contractors from the State Water Project called in the Department of Water Resources into a closed meeting, and that closed meeting is what we know today as the Monterey amendments. This amendment led to the establishment of the Kern Water Bank Authority in 1995. The Kern Water Bank was handed over to local agencies who could support the financial and environmental risks involved with operating a water bank. In 1996, the Kern Water Bank was handed over to the authority in exchange for 14 billion paper water. Now that we know the history of the water bank, let's discuss how it functions. The water bank is an underground reservoir 32 square miles beneath the Kern County. It was supposed to be used as an emergency water supply for the LA area. As mentioned before, it can hold up to 488 billion gallons of water, and water is saved underground during the wet years and dispersed during the droughts. The water is delivered for agricultural and municipal uses. The problem with this is the disparity between the water that is pumped and the water that is replenished. There is a huge discrepancy between those numbers, and that's what we're here to address today. So 25% of California Valley produces 25% of the crops that is consumed by everyone around the U.S. So this makes California Valley a very important and vital part of the world in general. But 80% of the water that is used to make that 25% of crops is used towards 80% of California's water goes towards agriculture. And the reason for that is the ownership of the Kern Water Bank. Even though the Kern Water Bank is a public entity, there are private companies who own stake in the company. For example, companies like the Wonderful Company, Roll International, Paramount Founding, and even Harvard. These companies are when private companies are part of public entities, people are wondering, are public interests actually being considered? Some of the produce being farmed include vineyards, alfalfa, and almonds. It takes up to 6 gallons of water just to make 1 gallon of wine. Alfalfa takes up 4.5 acres of water per growing season. And it takes 1 gallon of water to make 1 measly almond. When these numbers are taken into consideration, you have to wonder, is it effective to use that much water to make basically non-essential items when there are communities within the San Joaquin Valley that are struggling to access safe and clean water.
Now we're going to hand it over to Jalen, who's going to discuss the first letter of our race initiative.
In light of all of these facts, we are here to strongly advise you to reevaluate your role in the California water crisis, the purpose of the Kern Water Bank, and the policies it currently operates under. The general sentiment is that public trust has been breached by a water monopoly in the form of the Kern Water Bank Authority. This water monopoly includes some of the largest private agribusinesses and development corporations in the country. Many public figures maintain that assets like the Kern Water Bank need to be returned to the public. They advocate for trends towards transparency, especially in times of crisis. Much of the problem with the Monterey Amendments and the current management of the Kern Water Bank is that these decisions have happened and continue to happen behind closed doors. There is a lack of trust and communication, which has caused a ripple effect of negative consequences for your organization's reputation. It's also worth noting that the original efforts to develop this water bank were stopped due to the project being deemed unfeasible. Over the years, there have been numerous lawsuits and legal challenges leveled against the Kern Water Bank, citing environmental issues and backdoor deals as the primary concerns. While no legal action has shut down the Kern Water Bank, it would be unwise to ignore this discord entirely. Legality is difficult to pin down when you are the ones making the rules. So it's important to consider opposing voices when determining how best to operate an organization like this. For some time, the Kern Water Bank has been considered a hindrance to fair water access and distribution. But what if you were to change that public perception to that of a protector of water resources? Doing this requires you to acknowledge the effects of your previous actions and to redefine your organization in terms of transparency. Water must be managed equitably, sustainably, and peacefully. As the governing board of the Kern Water Bank, this responsibility falls to you. The question is, what are you going to do about it?
Now let's talk about the A in race, which stands for adopt. And when we're referring to adopt, we're referring to adopting new management practices. So if the Kern Water Bank Authority hopes to be a sustainable leader, it must move away from interest driven solely by profit. And this can be accomplished in two ways. First, by redefining your values, and second, by creating and adopting new policies. Now, before moving forward, one thing that I would like to note is your responsibility. So the Kern Water Bank was first bought up and developed by government agencies, these being the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project. And they developed this resource under the premise that California law sees water as a public good, and that it's held to ensure the greatest benefit for the public and future generations. And so when you, the Kern Water Bank Authority, were gifted this resource, you also adopted this responsibility. However, it hasn't been managed very well. And before moving on, I would like to touch on the fact that we understand that you are here today because you are seeking advice, and we're not here to make blame or to point fingers. Ultimately, to address that there has been a disconnect between your responsibility and what you claim to be achieving and what actually you should be doing. So, we would like to help you turn from a water monopoly into a water democracy here today. Now, one thing that we like to note on is how this benefits you as an organization. Because currently you create a profit from selling your water to municipal interests like Los Angeles or to agricultural uses. Now that's not a problem, but you have to do so in an equitable and accessible way. So we want you to note on what's the bedrock of your profit. One of those things is people. It's people who are buying your water. And ultimately, if they don't trust you and don't trust the resource that you're selling and how you are doling it out, they're not going to want to purchase it from you. Additionally, you also rely on the planet, because if you are taking up too much water, for example, from the Kern Water Bank, then you're not going to be able to have a renewable resource that's going to sustain itself. So ultimately, it benefits you to think more in the long term. And I'll give you one example. Baker Farming Company had to give up 1,000 acres of healthy almond trees, and they reside in Central Valley, California. And during an interview, Matthew Baker said, and I'm glad I pulled them out because it's just impossible to find water. Now, we understand that the Kern Water Bank Authority is not solely responsible for the water crisis here in California. However, that doesn't mean that you haven't been advocating in the way that you should regarding water allocation and equitability. So we want you to consider how the planet and people affect the long-term interests of your industry. And so we encourage you to think beyond the obligations that you currently have. One thing that I would like to note is just because something is legal or financially feasible does not mean that it's ethical. And based on your actions, we believe that you need to be more transparent and create values that align with what you think will be in your long-term interests. For example, when going through your website, we noticed that you do not have a mission or value statement. We believe that this would be helpful in defining a path to guide your future policies and to be transparent with the public. So this is one recommendation that we have for you. And by doing so, by defining your values through a mission and value statement, this can help you guide your policy decisions and adopting policies that are not just in line with ethics, but also and not just what is legally or financially beneficial, but what you know to be ethical and what you hope to achieve for the future. So when adopting policies, we have two main recommendations based on the Sustainable Development Goal 16, which is to promote peaceful, inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and to build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. So adopting this to be your value statement today, we recommend that you adopt these two policies. The first is third-party supervision, guided by expert oversight with the good of the public in mind. Some examples of this could be bringing in third parties that represent environmental groups to determine if you are removing water in a sustainable way from the Kern Water Bank. Could also involve bringing in experts when it comes to equitability to determine how these resources are being distributed. Additionally, we recommend that you involve stakeholders. You need to bring the public into these decision-making spaces regarding water allocation. You must be transparent as an organization in order to be trustworthy. And then we also encourage you to look beyond obligation, because as we discussed, just because something is financially possible or is legal doesn't mean that's ethical. But we encourage you not to think of this as a possible liability or as a free pass, but instead as an opportunity. Because this is your chance to set the standard for equitable water access in your industry. And show your stakeholders that there's a relationship based on more than just financial transaction or legal obligation. You have the opportunity here to set up a water market that people trust and believe in. So by sharing your values with the public, creating policies that are in line with those values, and achieving your goals all in a transparent and authentic way, we believe that you can make change that people trust and believe in. Now, I'm going to pass it off again to Jalen, who's going to talk about our next letter.
So this all sounds well and good when discussing it in a meeting like this, but actually making these changes is going to require collaboration, compliance, and effort from all key parties, which brings us to the C of our RACE initiative. Of course, when water distribution is on the line, collaboration is a lot easier said than done. It's very difficult to get everyone on the same page when everybody comes to the table with their own agendas. Water wars is a frequent term used to discuss issues of water distribution here in California. In fact, issues with water distribution are a large part of the reason why the Monterey Amendments were created in the first place. So this is an ongoing challenge. Regardless of these challenges, we must make every effort to shift priorities away from corporate interests and towards public need. Water in California is shared across three sectors: environmental, agricultural, and urban. Agriculture makes up about 60% of groundwater use. As previously mentioned, the Kern Water Bank Authority has a lot of interest in the agricultural industry, with some of your members directly representing agricultural organizations. There is a conflict of interest between the current agencies of the Kern Water Bank and the widespread need across the state. There are also public fears that these large corporations are buying up farmland as a pretense, when in reality they are just looking to control the water. Some very extreme actions have been proposed to deal with these problems, such as completely shutting off water to the California Valley, sacrificing all that rich farmland for a more secure water future. We propose an alternative route through our RACE initiative that we believe will satisfy all parties. Sustainable Development Goal 2 is to end hunger, achieve food security and improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. We would like to focus on that last part in particular. Make no mistake, we are not ignoring the vital role California plays in food production. It is incredibly important to ensure food security, but it is equally important to ensure that current agricultural practices are not creating additional and unnecessary risks. Right now, big agriculture is using an enormous amount of water to meet these goals. which puts a lot of strain on other sectors and surrounding communities that also depend on water to thrive. At some point, you have to ask the question, how big can big agriculture get before it's just unsustainable?
We believe in putting people first because making water is a human right. Water is not just something that is a commodity. And while it is something that you can sell or buy as an organization, that's not solely what it is. It also is a human right. In the same way that the food industry operates. While food is a human right, we understand that if a certain monopoly is controlling it too much, people are not going to be able to access it.
Now, this isn't to say that we're going to ignore agriculture with these new policies. Sustainable Development Goal 2 hopes to implement effective and sustainable policies for agricultural industry in the long run. So it's actually going to benefit your interests in the future. But in order to get to that point, we must set the course now. We must shift our needs to meet the needs of the health and well-being of the state as a whole. We've seen the dangers of water privatization in countries like Chile, where extractive industries were prioritized over communities, or in countries like Australia, where water markets catered to the rich and left the smaller agents unable to keep up. We can't allow this trend to continue here in California. The people must come first. They must be first in this situation. Previous management of the Kern Water Bank has proven that those with power control the resources, while those without power are cut out of the conversation. Our biggest recommendation to you today in regards to collaboration is to bring the public back into this conversation so that you can ensure accountability and transparency on all levels. So we've established your role in the California water crisis, the responsible and sustainable actions you should consider taking, and some of the pragmatic benefits of implementing these new practices. But there's one more reason why you should feel motivated to make these changes.
And that reason represents the last letter of our race initiative, empathize. At the end of the day, this entire situation boils down to one simple point. Water is a human right. In 2013, California released a law stating that every person has the right to safe and accessible drinking water. This relates to Sustainable Goal 6, which states to ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. If this goal isn't reached by 2030, there are some risks involved. For example, 1.6 billion people will lack drinking water. 2.8 billion people will lack safely managed sanitation. 1.9 billion people will lack basic hand hygiene facilities. These three components are essential to health and well-being of people around the world. And the fact that California citizens to this day are among these numbers is unacceptable. The Kern Water Bank describes itself as a water resource, a wildlife habitat, and an important part of the Bakersfield community because the Kern Water Bank is just southwest of the city. But there are people in Bakersfield who lack safe drinking water, and many communities within the San Joaquin Valley also experience this lack of water. And the California state auditors released a report stating that nearly 1 million Californians don't have access to water. And of those million Californians who don't have access to clean water, they live within the San Joaquin Valley and marginalized communities. So the question must be asked, how is it possible that a valley with one of the world's largest water banks is experiencing such circumstances? One of the people in one of those communities is Maria Aravello, who lives in Pixley, California, a San Joaquin Valley town. Maria and her community have been working for the past 20 years to establish a church in her community, but the water, or rather the lack thereof, has stopped this from happening. This community feels like it's vulnerable because they depend on fair water distributions, but it's just not happening. They feel powerless to act because they feel like they're at the mercy of organizations and state laws. But you, the Kern Water Bank, you have the power to empower these communities so they can have something as simple as a church to worship in. Despite these hardships, Maria and her community are hopeful that things will get better in the future. And while state grants and local organizations are working towards aiding the water crisis, we need you, the Kern Water Bank Authority, to accept responsibility in this situation and to do what we believe you have the ability to do.
It all comes down to empathy, ladies and gentlemen. You have a duty to your communities. Water management in California is going to change because of the law legislation, new 2040 laws regarding groundwater to come into compliance for agricultural pumping. It's all going to happen. The question is, how is the Kern Water Bank going to approach these changes? By adopting our RACE initiative, you have the chance to redefine your organization as a sustainable water resource that is geared towards public good, going all the way back to the original intent of this resource that you find yourselves in possession of. You can set yourselves apart as responsible managers of water who understand the challenges California faces and understand your responsibility in solving these issues. Citizens throughout the San Joaquin Valley, the Central Valley, across the state will reap the benefits of these changes that you make. It'll be a positive new direction for the state. Our RACE initiative ensures that the Kern Water Bank Authority aligns itself with these sustainable development goals to promote more effective and sustainable actions in the bank's operations itself, and also to promote a more secure water future for this generation and every generation to come. Let's not race towards the bottom of the well, to the bottom of the reservoir, to the bottom of your water resources and be left with nothing to do. Instead, let's race towards sustainability. Thank you very much for your time here today.
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
We appreciate your thoughtful consultation to the Kern Water Bank Authority. We'll start with some questions from our team here. I'll start with one. You presented so many upsides, so many potential positives. Should we consider this initiative, to consider these recommendations? What is on the flip side of the coin, what is any potential downside if we don't move forward in the near term on these recommendations?
So there are two potential downsides that come off straight at the top of our heads. So one of them is, at the moment, the Kern Water Bank Authority finds itself in the absolute power. It is in absolute control of this resource. There's a lot of benefits to be had to that, a lot of personal motivations to be satisfied. That's not a bad thing. Like we've said, you're a business, you're an organization. It's in your best interest to look out for your interests. But there is a potential danger here in that this organization could be taken away from you, because this is not the first time a situation like this has happened. In the 1900s, William Mulholland and his associates bought up a lot of land here in California just to get the water resources, and they created a water monopoly similar to how it's been functioning here. Eventually, the circumstances got so dire that the state legislation took that away from them, and it ended up going into the LA aqueduct, I believe. So because they were not able to manage these resources responsibly, equitably, they were not paying attention to the writing on the walls around them, they ended up getting the choice taken away from them. So that is one potential negative side. The other one, you might be losing some of your direct control over what happens here. But we like to believe that an organization in power does not have to be an inherently bad thing. An organization in power is able to do a lot of good if they have the motivation to do so. And so we believe that those are two reasons why, even with the potential downsides of it, you should be motivated into making these changes.
Did Top Hat Consulting come across any other case studies or reference points where this has successfully been implemented in other districts and amongst other water authorities? Not so much that we would borrow their playbook, but that we would know that there really is a success story to taking this action.
I can't think of any off of the top of my head, but again, I think we kind of covered this in the presentation. That's not a bad thing. This is your chance to be a first mover in your industry and to set the standard. And so, while this hasn't been implemented yet, we would like to help you do so.
And we've seen what happens when actions aren't taken to correct situations like this.
I have a question. As to you quoted a resource, so please refresh my memory. But 1 million Californians do not have access to water. You can't exist without water. So, I mean, that broad statement I have a hard time with. If you mean sufficient water, or for water that for all that they want to do, like this church you made, that's different. But to make a statement that 1 million Californians do not have access to water, they wouldn't exist. They would have perished by now.
Okay, so the state auditor in California. The state audit released a report saying that water systems are failing to provide safe drinking water to nearly 1 million Californians. Of course, Californians can buy bottled water and they can drive to other places to get water, but the systems that are put in place specifically to provide them water are failing. That's what we meant.
And one thing I would like to add to that is you're correct. These Californians do have access to water, but it's where they're getting their water from. They're not getting it from their shower or their tap or from the sink. They're buying bottled water to wash their hands. They're giving themselves scrub baths in their bathroom from bottled water. They don't have water in their tanks. So they're getting water, they're buying it from bottled water sources that are bottling it in California or other places in the US or abroad. So that's when we're talking about it. These 1 million Californians don't have access to water in their homes.
Okay, there's two ways to increase profits, and that's you build revenues or cut expenses. Was there any focus on desalination of water, of providing containers, whether it's us at Kern Water or individuals? We've had tremendous amount of rain in California. If everybody had, some form to store that water or garner it, that would solve some problems. That's not drinking water, but that's water in general that I don't have to put on the land if I have it on lawn or whatever, if I have it stored. Are there recommendations to help us increase water storage for future use?
Are you talking about as your organization or individuals in the community?
Well, both.
For individuals in the community, I would say one barrier is that people just can't pay for things. A lot of people have well water or they have tanks, but it costs $30,000 to replace those things. So for example, to dig a new well, that's $30,000, and people just don't have that because the groundwater level is getting too low for their well to reach. As for like buying containers to store water in, you can have water that way, but it's not sanitized or cleaned. And you can buy equipment for that, but that's not accessible for everyone. But this also is an opportunity for you because if you want to do work in the community, you can go out and provide these things. You can provide information, or you can actually directly pay for these products to give them out to the community.
And might I just add, these questions that you're asking are exactly the kind of questions that the Race Initiative is hoping to prompt from you. This is the exact response we want to see, is not so much the end-all, be-all solution to every issue of water distribution and storage and management, but to get us thinking about these questions. Because when we're set in our ways and just going on one track, we're not considering these other ideas. We're not considering new ways of doing things or ways to better the process. So thank you for asking these questions, because this is exactly what we were hoping to get out with our initiative.
Because I would like to also clarify one thing on what you just said, because I really like that, is that our framework is here to help you find solutions. We don't provide the solution. We're here to help you think through the issue and to come up with questions like you were asking to help figure out what is going to be best for your communities.
Other KWBA?
Yeah, I have one question here, top hat. Are you aware of why those private companies are on our board at the first place?
So unfortunately, no. Because the Monterey agreements happened in a closed-door meeting, no one really knows exactly why that happened. We do know that there was strife happening between North California and Central Valley, California, because the water rains in Northern California and comes down to the valley. And additionally, that there was strife between the agricultural entities and then also cities of who was going to get what water. So we know that that was happening, and the Monterey agreements were basically created to help fix those issues and the strife happening there. But we don't know exactly how agricultural interests came to your board.
And that's part of the issue with our suggestions on transparency, so that we can get to the bottom of how these things happen behind closed doors, why it's not been made public knowledge, so that we can answer questions like this and ensure that state needs are being met and not just private corporate interests.
And I would like to point to this slide really quickly. Westside Mutual Water Company is one of the entities on your board, and they have a 57% stake. Now, Westside Mutual Water Company is owned by Paramount Farming, and Paramount Farming is owned by the Wonderful Company. So one entity is an agricultural interest that owns 57% stake in the Kern Water Bank Authority, but this is not public information. So we encourage you to be transparent and to use the race initiative to figure out how to discuss these issues with your stakeholders and how to create some barriers that allow you to still maintain your seats on the Kern Water Bank Authority, but to make sure that there is some sort of solution to making sure that water is being distributed equitably.
Yeah, I think the reason I'm asking that is because, you know, it's all good you're suggesting us change things, right? But change is always hard.
Yes.
And as a consulting company, we would like you to help us find solutions that if we change that, what are we going to lose? How do we replace that? Also, how do we change it? What's our hurdles here, right? So it would be helpful if you help us figure that out along the way.
And we'd be happy to do that forward with you in the future.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
To Gail's point, how does the race initiative help us think through this as business leaders? I mean, I agree and understand with what you're saying in terms of the sustainability of our organization and this resource that we have. But in order to do that, we need to ensure the financial viability of our operations. How does the race initiative help us think through those financial decisions?
One thing that we'll know is that your finances are not disclosed on your website. We do know that you're profiting from selling water, as we stated, to cities or to agricultural uses, but we don't know exactly what your profits are. So we had limited information when dealing with recommendations on how, if you cut back using water to create more sustainability in the Kern Water Bank and how it operates, how that will affect your profits and what you could do instead. However, one thing we will note that we did go over our presentation is that ultimately, thinking in the long term is better. Currently, water is being used so much, and it's this idea of race to the bottom mentality. Everyone is sucking up. It's a milkshake. The California aquifer is a milkshake, and everyone has straws in it. And yours is one of the biggest. And you're sucking up water and delivering it to agricultural uses. But ultimately, we're seeing that, for example, with Matthew Baker, he had to pull up thousands of acres of almond trees because there just wasn't any water. So your customers are not buying your product anymore. So ultimately, you can see how in the long term that's not going to be financially feasible for your company.
And in addition to speaking on making profit, you're absolutely right that the race initiative doesn't seem to provide any instant gratification in terms of how you're going to make profit off of this. You might end up losing some, but it's that idea of sustainability in the long term. So as we mentioned, agricultural practices, we have to ask how much is too much. With your interests here, with your interest in the agricultural industry, current agricultural practices might end up being a negative effect to you in the long run because of a lack of effective water distribution. Whereas if we implement these practices now, we prevent these long-term hard losses in the future by taking a little bit of a setback here and promoting an overall more effective agricultural industry.
Can I see that slide again, where what the uses of water are? It was 1 gallon to produce 1 almond, 6 gallons to produce wine. Is that a bottle of wine or what?
A gallon.
A gallon of wine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right there.
And then there was a third one that.
Alfalfa. And an interesting fact about alfalfa, it's not actually native to California, so it doesn't need to be growing here. It's fun little fact.
Yeah, is that besides? Alfalfa is used as feed, isn't it?
Yes.
Acre feet of water, yes.
Okay. Well, except almonds are healthy, but.
They are.
Somebody said, you must be from California. Nobody else would bring a salad. I was in Texas with alfalfa sprouts on it.
Yeah.
But, okay, and then there was another, California Valley produces 25% of crops for, is that California, the U.S.?
The U.S.
The U.S., okay.
And it uses 80% of California water to make that 25%.
Hmm. That's, okay, I'm interested in how you're recommending bringing the public into decision-making. I mean, you have to have a management team. you can't get in a situation where, you know, decisions need to be made. They can't be made, you know, it seems that when you have public forums, it takes forever to organize them, forever to make a decision.
Absolutely.
So do you have any particular recommendations on how we would integrate the public more? I mean, have board meetings and have them attend? And
So, oh no, please finish.
well,
I
you
think
know,
that's a great point, because is it more that, that illusion of bringing the public in for our brand stewardship, or do we really need them as these co-decision makers in the process, which will take that setup and that, whether it's what type of forums and.
So the great thing about the race initiative is that there is not a specific box you need to check in terms of bringing the public into this. You have a lot of freedom and accountability. A lot of freedom and options in determining how this is going to work for you. Again, the whole point of this is catching the problem before it becomes a problem. So bringing the public into this discussion can look in a lot of different ways. The main theme, the goal we want to achieve in this, by whatever means that you bring them in, is that we, the public, understand that their interests are being fairly represented in this board, that it is not just these private corporations with their agendas getting all of the water, that they can look at this and know, look, here's how this water is being managed. I know because this agency is being transparent with me, they're open and honest about how they work, how it goes. I know that I'm being represented. And that doesn't mean that it's going to solve every public issue of water distribution. Again, Kern Water Bank is just one part of the water crisis for California and a fraction of a part of the water crisis of the world. You all are not going to be the ones to fix the problems, but for a portion of these communities, the communities you live in, the Central Valley, San Joaquin Valley, you can make a real difference in bringing the public into this so that they know that their interests are being represented and that the organization as a whole is working to make these improvements for the future.
But how is that going to be different than in the past? I mean, as you said, we've encountered this, or our predecessors encountered this public scrutiny and government involvement, and that's kind of what led to the discord and the disagreements that create this opportunity for us to exist. So while we hear you that we have an opportunity to bring in the public and be more accountable and transparent to the public, we're a little hesitant to do that because of the frustrations and problems that's caused in the past. It's very much of a antagonistic, one-sided relationship from the public that we've experienced. So what about the race initiative would help us protect ourselves from that risk of too much public scrutiny and a one-sided, draconian sort of approach to socialized water access is what we're afraid of.
One thing that I would like to say is you don't want too many cooks in the kitchen. And that's kind of what we were talking about public hearings.
right,
You
right.
get a lot of people with a lot of different ideas. They aren't experts. They don't know how everything works. And then you end up with a mess trying to sort through it. And then blaming gets passed around. And we understand that here at Top Hat Consulting. We get that. But at the same time, if you don't implement the racial initiative, things will be much worse. Because ultimately, if you are making the appearance that you are trying and you're being transparent in how you're making those changes, I think that will be more beneficial for you in the long run than the public having no information. Because already, if you haven't already noticed, there's a lot of articles and publications that have already been published about your organization, mostly in the negative.
You're already under public scrutiny.
You're already under public scrutiny. People already know, and people are already getting upset. So you need to turn this around by helping to show that you're trying, at least. And one thing I'll point out is the race initiative does not promise no public scrutiny. It doesn't promise that we won't run into these issues. Human beings, we have a tendency to repeat ourselves in history. We like to do the same things over and over again, thinking we're going to get different results. It doesn't usually work out for us, but that's how we do it. What it comes down to, a lot of what this decision is ultimately going to come down to is your communities are depending on this. It's a duty to care as a manager of this water resource. There are absolutely going to be problems that we encounter, and that's why we're here to work with our framework, work with you through this, provide whatever resources we can, because at the end of the day, you have a duty to care. You have a responsibility as a water manager, and we would like to help you achieve that through whatever problems and struggles and public discourse we end up encountering along the way. And as for the race initiative and how it can help you specifically, I think it comes down really to the last letter, which is E, empathize. You need to be empathizing with your communities, and if you're doing that, that's going to lead you in the right direction to making the necessary changes.
I have one more quick question.
Sure.
I'm sure you already went through our website and all the information. Did you see we have like a long list of our legal issues?
Absolutely, we did.
Yes.
Can you tell me what's our major legal issues here based on your research?
Your major legal issue, so it ends up coming down as kind of the same issue being brought up over and over again, which is the Environmental Institutional Review, I believe. I might be confusing my acronyms there, but it's EIR. And so it's just kind of the same issue that keeps getting called up by public scholars or environmental advocates saying, hey, you're not doing these things correctly the way here. And it keeps getting brought up. You all have worked with this organization. There are public hearings and things that we do to, not public hearings, but as these issues are brought up, you work with these individuals who are doing it, and you each time revise your statements and revise your codes of conduct for this. And then they keep bringing it up again, which is very interesting. Since its inception, for 26 years, there's been some form of legal lawsuit, challenge, contestation. Somebody's not happy with the legalities of how the Kern Water Bank Authority is operating. That only just ended in February of last year. So it's interesting that for 26 years, there's been somebody saying, we don't like what's going on here. And rather than ignoring that issue, we'd like to work with you to help with this and to keep these legal issues from being brought up again once and for all.
Cool, thank you.
Well, thank you. And I'll be mindful of our Q&A time, and now we're removing our identity hats for Top Hat, no pun intended, and we'll have some time to just provide you some feedback amongst ourselves and answer any questions that you may have for us. So I'll start. General feedback is I was so impressed with the thoroughness of the details of what you were able to provide in the back end, even anecdotally, if we during our Q&A phase, of knowing that whether it was information that was in the deck or you were speaking to, you just knew right off the bat what to speak to and what would be a relevant point. And visually, really thought your PowerPoint deck was spot on. You could see how everything kind of dovetailed from marketing communications and environmental studies as your backgrounds were. So it kind of layered in nicely here to deliver a really strong presentation.
Thank you.
I learned a lot. Other
You know, one of the things.
This is the CEO of wonderful company.
Yeah.
Here's your 57% stake right here, so you need a winner over with. No.
But actually, it was last year I listened to a presentation on how much water Mexico was using for to grow avocados, and avocado demand has gone skyrocketed. As you know, as a healthy food, as have almonds, and so. But I didn't realize that, and I think there's education to be made, and that was a part of their solution, and so I didn't hear it in your presentation. And maybe as consultants, you expect us to look at that, but I do think education needs to proliferate, because look, if you look, we're bringing our own bottles. I'm not buying bottled water, you know. I'm not, because I have filters everywhere in my house, and you know, I don't want to contribute to plastic. And so part of the initiative was to educate them how to best use water as an individual, as well as farming companies, and how they could conserve water. So it might not have been your purview, but I don't know, maybe that's something you would recommend to us. I think it's something we should be doing, and I guess
that's why that slide was so compelling. And we're like, those are those data points. You're like, oh, I don't think everyone knows, and maybe we do know or don't know in that role of a bank authority, where you don't know those nuggets. Like, oh, we do need to do something, because how many gallons for just that? And I think
I think that was very important information, because I didn't know about the avocados. I would not have guessed a whole gallon for almonds.
One almond.
I mean, for one almond, and so. You know, it's a great food. Everybody keeps promoting it about, well, We got some in the
Yeah.
as snacks, and it, we're being responsible at LMU, giving out little bottles like that, and you hear about the plastic problem. I don't think that we hammer enough on, we've gotten all these rains, but hammer enough that water's still a problem long term. And, whether you're short showers, have a bucket in there if you're taking a shower.
Can
That's what I'm.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yesterday, we went out to eat and I had a salad and I had shaved almonds on it, and I picked up on the almonds. I was like, this is a gallon of water. It was just a sliver of an almond. But you're absolutely right, because that's one of the things that we really wanted to discuss, is that you have to acknowledge the problem in order for everyone who works for the Kern Water Bank Authority to know that it's an issue, and that's
Yeah.
where education comes in. So thank you for
Yeah.
bringing that up.
So, but I think it is good. I always learn things, and I've been a judge for years, but I always learn things in each presentation, that, because I just don't have time to read everything, Well, we're bombarded with information in the digital age, but
In thinking about that slide, as you think
mhm.
that
I thought
the
that was an
almond, like,
important slide.
I like that slide, and I think it could even be blown up further if there is anything that is that annual, like, well, this is the one California crops generate X percent. That equates to that eye-popping statistic, if it exists, because I think it's compelling even at the granular level, but even more so knowing what we're looking at in our micro slice of the nation. I think really be interesting as well.
I took notes on stuff. I think points I would continue to hammer on it in other presentations. Water scarcity is in 40% of the world, even though we're looking at California as an example. All those statistics with the gallon, 1 gallon per 1 almond. I'd even be more emphatic. Do you realize that?
Yeah.
I believe the term used earlier was
Measly.
ridiculous.
It was ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, because these are, I've been collecting wine since I was 22, so the 6 gallons of water for 1 gallon of wine, I'm okay with. Yeah.
She takes short showers.
Yeah, I'll collect my water. But at any rate, I would even put more emphasis on those, because these are things people don't think of. And
The education aspect.
yeah,
Mhm.
well, it just makes you think, if you're asking us to, reallocate water rights, we need to look at how we're using the water. How are we allocating our profits? How are we allocating the water to, well, you said 80% goes to agricultural. I mean, I don't know if you cut back 10% to agricultural, I don't know what that does.
Agricultural economy only makes up 2% of California's economy as a whole. Yeah, 80% of the water is going there.
How many people are we feeding though? We're
Right.
feeding
We're
25
feeding a lot of people.
people.
But how many people
That's,
are there?
yeah, can we cut back to agricultural? Do we need to put our emphasis on how we store, how do we garner water and desalination plants? I'm probably not even pronouncing that right, but I know Cambria was having an issue, and they screwed around and didn't do, talked about a plant and then didn't do it, and then they were running out of water, and people were having to have trucks come in from other areas with water. So I think, how do we extend the water we have to protect what we're doing today, and how do we take care of the communities that are not getting sufficient water? I think that's a real challenge.
I think for me, that's where the presentation was really stronger. I think you guys did a good job of dimensionalizing the issue, right? Like, and there's different dimensions to explain this, and the educational component of it is really strong because it's personal to us, right?
Yes.
So personally, I can relate to an almond or 6 gallons of wine sounds fine to me. Sorry, gallon of wine. You know, then you had the example of the farmer, right? And his business being jeopardized. You had the church example. So I loved the dimensionalization of that. What I didn't see is you're coming in to advise us, right? And speak truth to power a little bit. But I loved how you guys were so diplomatic about it and like as a true partner. It's not an antagonistic consulting. It's not a house on fire, you know, change immediately. It was very, very thoughtful. One dimension that would have made it even stronger would be to sort of talk about who we are in this as decision makers. You talked about us as a board, as an entity, but I loved it when you guys really honed the problem down, and the word you had that was, I think, repeat this throughout was, we're here to deliver you worthwhile thinking. That really connected with me as a board member saying, okay, I have to make the decision here. I have an accountability. I have self-interest in my business. So just dimensionalizing it down to me as the board member, decision maker, I think brings in Gail's points about, well, we got to make money. We have to be sustainable, right, from that standpoint. And we have these legal risks, right? I don't want to be having my name dragged through the press and lawsuits and paying lawyers and all of that. So I think that would just been another dimension to make it really, really strong. But overall, wonderful presentation. TED Talk-like quality. So thank you for your preparation. It showed. Very, very compelling.
Good presentations.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And Michael's feedback made me think of the beyond obligation slide, like where it really is that beyond obligation, and then having that anecdotal, like, because as your role, but it's like that slide is really encapsulating all of that, the need to act, the need for the why.
Well, and your point was, you know, solve the problem before it becomes a problem. You know, is something I picked up from your presentation, and that was good to capture the whole, you know, as a summary of the whole thing.
And to that point, I think they did a good job. You all did a good job presenting the problem. Like, we hear a lot of these presentations, and it's sort of nebulous as to what's the problem they're trying to solve. I thought you guys came out, your presentation was very strong and clear right from the get-go. It just framed our thinking really, really well. So I commend you for doing that.
Thank you,
Great job.
because we debated it a lot because it's hard to present the problem to you when you're supposed to be representing the people who already know about the problem.
Yes,
So it's difficult to find that balance. So
you did a great job at it.
And I would say all of you are great speakers that, you know, I've seen so many presenters, and you're now reading the slides. I'm amazed you could memorize all the information and deliver it so well.
Good eye contact with your audience.
I saw speakers actually had a screen in front of them, you know, it's very common nowadays, and I'm sure you did a lot of work, you did a lot of research, obviously you're very familiar with your stuff, so overall I think you did a fantastic job. I'm very impressed. It's just because we're here talking, you know, I think one thing I would point out is probably just if you're presenting an issue to somebody or propose a change, even in the future at your workplace, right? You will always want to make sure that person feels comfortable first. Maybe tell us what we did right, just one slide, so that we're happy. And then you can propose your change. But I would like you also propose your solutions, because it's always good to talk about the things we're missing, but then give me a solution, make my life a little easier, right?
Even just to show that the model, the initiative, here's how it could fold out. I thought you did a great job pushing back on us when, you know, we're like, well, what about this? What about that? You really held your ground on. We're presenting you a model. We're not here to provide all the solutions, but for us to believe the model, we kind of have to see a few, like, here's how it could possibly solve that by generating.
Here are a few of our ideas.
Yeah.
Right.
You know.
And because every time when you propose a change, right, there's good things come with it, and there are bad things come with it, right? And I want to see you consider both, so that you're really doing consulting for us, right? You're not just picture this beautiful future for us, but I'm sure there are a lot of risk and issues along with it. and we would need to address it because those are practical things.
And then your comeback could be, well, for an additional 50,000, we'd be happy to give
$1,000,
you specific examples.
That's where consultants make the money.
How you sell your service.
You've heard that pitch a few times.
Yeah.
I'll be sure to remember that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Great job.
Great job. Thanks for
Thank
sharing
you.
and good luck with the
Can
competition.
I, before we wrap up, I don't know if you can answer this, but you did say we could ask you a question.
Sure.
Oh, yeah,
Our
good for you.
performance, so I'd like to.
Only one. You only get
Only
one.
one.
I'll
Yeah.
pick a really good question.
Sorry.
I'm not sure, so correct me if I'm breaching protocols of this, but tomorrow we go into our ethical portion of the competition, and I'm just
Mhm.
curious what your thoughts of are the ethical components of our framework. Did we make that clear to you in terms of this presentation, and would you have any recommendations that we could implement into our next?
I think you did a good job on advocating the efficacy of the community impact and the environmental impact. But we have a responsibility to our shareholders, even though we're privately held, right, in many regards. We have an ethical obligation to them, right? We have employees at our companies that we represent. It's easy to fight for the underdog and be an advocate for them. It's much more difficult, to your point, Ramber, right, to balance that with our own self-interests. And so if you could show how the race initiative ethically solves or addresses our ethical needs to protect our interests and our stakeholders, I think you could thread that needle. That would be amazing.
Okay, thank you.
And I don't know what they tell you about the topic. I believe in the KISS. Keep it simple. I would say we see the ethical problem as A, and the ethical solution is B. And B, that, it doesn't have to be, I think keeping it simple actually helps, the judges. Don't think you have to make it so sophisticated because we're in business and things like that. I would, they always say outline the problem, and even the solution, and then the rest of it, prove it, So I don't think it's bad to be very specific and very simple with the things you're supposed to cover in your presentations, especially the ethical, since this is a business ethics competition. So
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think we got it, but I don't think it helps to hit us in the head with it.
Well, let's ask the question back to you. Is there something that you felt like you could have been stronger on in the ethical argument? Is there what's causing you to ask that question?
Preemptive thinking is part of it, like to be prepared. Another part is when you're incorporating so many different dimensions. You have the financial, the legal, the ethical, the social in some cases. There's a lot of different things that you're balancing. And so we tried to incorporate that through a race framework. It's an acronym, it's snappy, you remember it, you're going to think about it later. And so it's kind of that idea that you'll be able to filter and weave these components through the initiative. But when you do that, it's easy to get bogged down by some things, or sometimes you focus too much one letter on one thing and then it's not at all. So I just wanted to see if we were correctly highlighting some of the ethical implications through that and not getting lost in translation anyway.
And one thing I'd add on to that is why I like that question is because our case has very big, there's so much information, it's very difficult to sort through and figure out, okay, this is an ethical component we need to touch on, we don't have time for this one. And so figuring out if we covered enough, but it was also in a comprehensive way, was important. So
I think you did it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
And we get it. It's hard to parse it with, when you get to that day too, that, topically it's ethics, it's business, it's legal. There's so many parts, but then to hone in only on ethics when the other parts aren't absent. There's still parts of it that layer in. These aren't individual.
Tie my two ideas together, bring it back to that person, and just when you bring in those personal examples, is this ethical, right? Or how is this ethical? Is it ethical for a farmer to have to make a choice to ruin his long-term business prospects because he can't get access to, affordable market price water? Is it ethical that consumers don't understand the impact of their food consumption on water? Like, if you put on, I work for Albertsons, if we put on every label, you know, this almond that you bought, it's all organic and healthy,
Mhm.
but it costs a gallon or, you know, 10 gallons of water to make. Will we buy it? Is it ethical to hide that from the consumer? I think bringing those ethical dimensions into those personal stories helps make it really clear. Maybe that can help you ensure you're hitting those dimensions.
Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Are you given the 5 things that we're judging you on?
We
Like-
have a sheet on the website that we can access, but I don't know if it's the same one.
Legal dimension, financial business dimension,
Yeah.
ethical dimension, persuasiveness and presentation skill. Now, I mean, yeah, that's gonna happen anytime. But I would say in the beginning and then summarize. The legal, the financial, and the ethical. I don't think that hurts your presentation. One sentence, I mean,
Mhm.
Yeah. And
yeah.
end on that slide, keep that slide up, is so just we're looking at it as we're asking you the questions as a board, right? That we're seeing.
Well, you may not have the same judges, so
Yeah.
just so you hit people that it reminds them that you've covered it,
Mhm.
you know, so.
Good luck.
Thank you
Good
very
luck.
much.
All right.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.